Get ready for Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes, the 30-minute show packed with an hour's worth of information, bringing you familiar guests on important issues such as immigration, education, the Middle East, culture, religion, and the changing worldviews of Americans and the world. You've seen her on Fox News, you've read her on the World Wide Web. Now here's Sharon.
For such a time as this.
Freeing the minds of the brainwashed masses.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of Changing Worldviews. Today, Israel will be gone in 8 years, according to one Hamas official who claimed in a speech honoring the anniversary of Operation Cast Lead that, quote, Palestine would replace the Jewish state by 2022. Hamad noted in a speech that the Palestinian Arabs, according to Islamic prophecies, will enter the Al-Aqsa Mosque in jubilation and victory like they entered it the first time. In the meantime, WorldNet Daily reports that if Iran breaks its deal with the West tomorrow, the country would be only 2 to 3 weeks away from producing enough highly enriched uranium to assemble a nuclear weapon. 2 to 3 weeks. And that's according to Ali Henonen, former deputy director of the International Atomic Energy Agency. The UNESCO delegates declared Yellowstone to be the first, quote, endangered World Heritage Site and called for a protective buffer zone of 150 miles in diameter around the entire park. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Part of an interview that I had with Dr. Michael Coffman, who talks about Agenda 21, environmental justice, nature worship is all part of this that you need to know about. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Sharon Hughes, coming to you from the Wild, Wild West, and we mean wild.
So even though we are the major funder, the United States is the major funder of the UN, even though constantly outvoted by other, quote, member states, we have given the UN 22 U.S. national parks and monuments like the Statue of Liberty as part of the UN World Heritage Sites. What's that all about? What does it mean for private property rights? The World Heritage Committee actually now has 936 such sites from around the world. What is going on? There are those that are very much concerned that private property rights are literally disappearing, and not only in the officially designated areas, but in what's called buffer zones that are outside the designated areas. Now, we've done some shows on this in the past. I encourage you to go to changingworldviews.com and listen to some of those shows. But as we reported, for instance, buffer zones is exactly what happened just outside of Yellowstone National Park, which is a World Heritage Site, when UNESCO delegates were called in by the Park Service in an attempt to stop the development of a gold mine located outside the park. The UNESCO delegates declared Yellowstone to be the first, quote, endangered World Heritage Site and called for a protective buffer zone of 150 miles in diameter around the entire park. The buffer zone stopped development and access to millions of acres of private property, and thus there are those that say that is the purpose of the World Heritage Sites. What do we need to know? Dr. Michael Coffman going to break down what this means for Americans. To stay with me.
Conservancy, the Sierra Club, groups like this, International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, or ICLEI, and then they made it their mission to bring it into the United States. And so you have them come into the federal government, help write programs and grant programs. Then you have them go into the state governments and surround the state legislators there and get them to accept those grants and write policies like creating comprehensive development plans, forcing communities to do that. Then they go into the communities and they surround your county commissioners, your city councilmen, and tell them, here are these grants, you need to get this, you need to do that. And so they forced it from the international level to UN down into your local communities.
What will this year hold for us, for America? January is Repair, Rebuild, Restore Month at Changing Worldviews. As a matter of fact, I think those are key words for the entire year. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on the 4 institutions that were originated, designed by God Himself himself. And it's our generation's responsibility to do whatever we can as stewards to repair what isn't working, to rebuild what has been broken, and even restore what has been lost for future generations.
Want more than the facts? Want the truth? Won't you help reach even more listeners with a financial donation? Go to www.changingworldviews.com, donate page, and give either a one-time contribution or become a monthly partner, or send your check to Changing World Views, P.O. Box 750-624, Petaluma, California 94975-0624. Truth matters, and your help matters more than you know. Please make a donation today.
Okay, thanks for staying with us, ladies and gentlemen. So today we're going to be talking about getting the UN out of American government. The average person that goes to the different parks and monuments around our nation and sees a plaque that says World Heritage Site might think that's pretty awesome, that we're protected by the UN. But for those of us who understand the agenda of world government, the Agenda 21 goals of the United Nations and so forth, we understand that there's some concerns here over the sovereignty of America. So far, the U.S. has turned over 22 sites to the UN, including the Grand Canyon, Yosemite, Yellowstone, Mammoth Caves, the Statue of Liberty, the Olympic National Park, the Everglades, 22 such sites. And so what is this UN's World Heritage Sites anyway? The UN actually now controls over 70% of the world's land mass. And it started with a treaty that was signed here in America by Bill Clinton in 1994. But this treaty was really a package of 34 treaties, most of which were single-issue treaties with single nations. However, it is one of several environmental treaties that emerged from the 1992 UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro. And one of those treaties, the Convention on Climate Change, was also ratified in 1992. The Convention on Biological Diversity was ratified by the United States in 1994. So now, ladies and gentlemen, here's an interview that I had with Dr. Michael Coffman on this issue.
Before we bring on our guest, I want to play this clip that is from the trailer of the film Grinding Down America. Let's go ahead and play that, and then Dr. Michael Coffman. Here we go.
Hello. In the traditional motion picture story, the villains are usually defeated. The ending is a happy one. I can make no such promise for the picture you're about to watch. The story isn't over. You and the audience are part of the conflict.
More human beings were slaughtered in the 20th century than all previous centuries combined.
We're talking a congressional record, 135 million dead.
Their entire purpose was to detach our culture
Hello, Dr. Coffman.
from any moral anchors whatsoever.
You look at the changes in America since 1960, perhaps. The whole culture's been transformed.
They're coming out of the belief that the village should raise the child. And the village means the government.
They have deliberately destroyed the American family, understanding that's the foundational block that builds a society.
We've come from Norman Rockwell's America to, Hugh Hefner's America.
If we lose the Judeo-Christian framework, we're lost forever.
Dr. Michael Coffman, thank you so much for joining us again, and I absolutely love your latest book.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon. I really appreciate it. And just listening to the trailer for that video, they're exactly right. It's just unbelievable what the progressives have been able to accomplish and how their particular ideology is so destructive and why they can't see it themselves. There is a mental block from them connecting to reality. They think in images, they think in emotion, and as a consequence, they never really see the reality of what they're doing.
I really want to get into the whole property rights issue because that I believe is what they had in mind when they were saying life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think it originally was,
yes.
Property rights. And so that's what that meant. It wasn't, flower children dancing in the street kind of thing. But, this administration, I've been tracking the czars that he has, and it's unprecedented. He's now up to 45 czars. And for those folks that don't know, it's unprecedented. I think FDR had like 11. Clinton had 8. President Obama has 45. And these are unvetted, unaccountable to Congress leaders that are in charge of billions of taxpayer dollars in certain arenas of the government. And we didn't know when we heard Obama say when he was running, we're only 5 days away from fundamentally transforming America.
Yes, and boy, are we seeing it now. And 4 more years of that, I think, will basically destroy this country to the point. I mean, we still have the United States of America, but we'll never be able to bring back the liberties and the standard of living and the prosperity that this nation has been known for and has been a beacon for the rest of the world to try to emulate. We are very close to destroying that ability for us to continue on that role because we are $16 trillion deficit. There is no way we can pay it back, and the progressive liberals in Congress are blocking every effort to try to rectify Medicare and Social Security so that it's sustainable. They are totally blind to the reality that within 10 years that will bankrupt this country, literally bankrupt us, and we will be like Greece. And as a consequence, it's critically important that we begin to find out who is our candidates. Are they progressives? I don't care if they're neocons in the Republican Party or liberals, progressives in the Democratic Party. Take a hard look at them, because one of the characteristics that I found in doing my research is that they lie. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to pick them out specially. But they are told, they are trained to lie, to give you the impression that they're doing what you want to do and then do exactly the opposite. You cannot trust them in what they're doing. Look at their record. What has been their voting record? If we continue on with Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, welfare, and so forth in general, we will literally take a nosedive economically, or our foot's right over the cliff right now, and we need to begin to restore this republic, the economy, and so forth with small government and very knowledgeable policies.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just tuning in, we're talking with Dr. Michael Coffman. His latest book, Plundered, How Progressive Ideology is Destroying America. Some of the chapters in his book, The History of Progressivism, Politics of Deceit in the U.S. Global Debt Crisis, Collapsing America, and Corrupting Education, Agenda 21, which we're going to get into. But let's talk for just a second here, if we could. One of your chapters, Wrongly Using the Law to Plunder. What do you mean by that?
Well, it was a theme that was developed. John Locke talked about it, but not as succinctly as a Frenchman, nobleman, French legislature in 1849, by the name of Bastiat, Frederick Bastiat. And he wrote a little book, about a 70-page book. It's a pamphlet, actually, that is probably got the best description of what the law should be. And he starts out with the premise that the law should be established to protect private property rights. That's the foundation of the entire purpose for government. And both Locke and Jefferson and most of our founding fathers repeated that constantly in some of their letters and some of the writings that they had, is that the private property rights are the foundation of wealth creation and liberty. And as a consequence, Madison basically said that the whole purpose of government is to protect private property. That's the principle that was laid down by Frederick Bastiat. And then he goes on to establish the fact that when you begin to twist that and make it so that you have the government has the ability to encroach upon private property rights, you're literally plundering the liberties and the wealth creation ability of private property rights, to the point where you now have turned the law into a means of robbing people and making criminals out of anyone who wants to protect their private property rights.
Doctor, it's very interesting that I have young people that will send me emails and, Facebook or whatever, and I'm talking, the 20, 30-somethings, really asking, well, what's wrong with socialism, which, of of course, is the precursor to communism, which, of course, you lose your property rights. I just don't think the younger generation, and maybe some in our generation, have forgotten why property rights are so important. Can you just tell us why that is foundational?
The fundamental purpose, there's two levels of private property rights. First of all, a private property rights gives you ownership and a sense of responsibility. And if you're farming or something like that, you want to maintain that land so that it continues to yield your crops year after year after year. That's one reason. In fact, there are several places in South America that have instituted these kinds of property rights without what I'm about to tell you next. And it's really helped tremendously. But the big key factor, huge, is the fact that, and our founders knew this, and it's just been rediscovered this last 10 years, that private property rights provides the banks the ability to loan you money on the equity in your home or your property. And so you can start a business or you can buy into a business and so forth, and that's the foundational part of the wealth creation, because it is a very, very powerful tool that the United States is one of the unique nations in the world that up until now, and it's changing rapidly now, but up until now, we have had the most prosperous nation, one of the most libertarian nations in the history of humanity because of private property rights and the ability to put up your house for a loan, a mortgage, and be able to use that equity then to buy a business or to build a business or whatever the case might be. 70% of all of our small businesses started with home equity loans.
Wow.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Exposing the worldviews behind the political, cultural, and ideological wars being waged in our nation and world, Sharon packs an hour's worth of information into every half hour with news you can use.
Academia is often the wellspring of race hatred. This is something that we need to recognize. Eugenics, indeed, was a campaign to create a master race by do-gooders and progressives. They were attempting to create a utopia.
What's ending up happening is that Christians who say, I don't care about issues, they realize that's what's being used to silence the gospel. If they can silence the truth, they will silence the gospel.
You're being a watchwoman on the wall, Sharon. I say that with all sincerity. Appreciate what you're doing to sound the alarm, and we need more shows like yours.
Changing Worldviews gets funded entirely through the tax-deductible donations of our supporters. If you've not done so already, renew your active support today. And if you're new to Changing Worldviews, would you consider helping us with a donation, becoming a monthly partner to help get the truth out and tell the world the side of the story that mainstream media doesn't report? Thank you so much ahead of time for supporting our efforts.
Well, thank you for staying with us, everyone. Today we are talking with Dr. Michael Coffman. I consider a friend now. We've had him on the show several times. You know that we don't have anyone on the show unless we believe that what they are saying is not only because they want to get the truth out, but they are well documented, they are credible in their research and in their person. Dr. Coffman, thank you for staying with us, talking to us about your latest book, Plundered. So let's look at Agenda 21. I remember the first time I met you, and I'm not even sure if we met then, but I saw you, it was at the Council for National Policy when my husband was running for Congress, and you did a presentation, and I was so struck by these maps that you had put together of how there are those that are trying to regionalize our country, actually the world, and also cause us to come into communities and in the name of land protection and the environment and so forth. And, you know, you've been on this for years, and I know that information has gone viral and probably been the strongest impetus for bringing people to this awareness. You were also almost the sole person that helped to get Congress to stop the ratification of the Convention on Biological Diversity, correct?
That is correct. There was just 5 of us involved, and it was really miracles because there's only limited amount that any one person or small group of people can do. But what we did was amplified 1,000 times over and literally stopped it dead in its tracks about an hour before the cloture vote was to be taken to ratify this particular treaty that would have ultimately set aside one half of the United States into wilderness reserves and corridors. One half of the United States
Wow.
put into nature, as it were.
Wow. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so we've been following Agenda 21, so it's almost like it's coming up to its climax. Am I correct? What do our listeners need to know about this Agenda 21 and why you continue to talk about it?
Well, Agenda 21, the premise of it came up back in the 70s. It was brought out to the world to see it named Agenda 21 in 1992 at the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit. And now we're 20 years after that point, and the United Nations is about to hold their 20th year anniversary of this, and the central part of it's called sustainable development. And I don't think any of us are necessarily against sustainable development per se, but what we're seeing in this is a movement towards the religious belief that the earth is nature, or the God is nature.
Wow.
And therefore, we must protect nature at all costs, no matter what humanity needs. Their needs are secondary to those of what they see nature needing. Now, Agenda 21 itself is a 40-chapter document that literally covers every aspect of human life. And when I say every aspect, I mean every aspect of human life in one form or another. How we interact with the environment and how we interact with each other. And it's designed basically to be what they call sustainable, provide sustainability. Well, their idea of sustainability is basically to not use any modern technology to grow crops and other sundry things. The Convention on Biological Diversity, for instance, they had as the Global Biodiversity Assessment the belief that all genetic material, all fertilizers, all pesticides, and so forth are harmful to Mother Nature and should not be used. And and they said right in the documents that would probably reduce the capacity to feed humans by at least 50% when they did this. But they said it had to be done to save Mother Earth. Well, they had a plan, basically. You can look elsewhere in this document and see that within 50 years, they wanted to bring down the human population to no more than 2 billion, preferably 1 billion human beings. At that time, we had 6 billion. We have 7 billion now. And if we were to keep the 6 to 7 billion people on planet Earth, they said the only alternative we can do is to become agrarian peasants.
Wow. So are they still on to this agenda of population control? Of course, I know the answer to that. Well, bring us up to date on that.
Well, this particular decade, this is the 10-year effort on the part of the United Nations to protect biological diversity. The last 10 years was water, and this 10 years is biodiversity. So I expect to see more pressure being brought onto the United States to actually ratify the Biodiversity Treaty. But we have enough information and enough people know about it and how it's linked to Agenda 21. And I want to explain a little bit more about Agenda 21 in a moment. But we have enough people where I don't think they'll ever be able to do that because people, how we stopped it was once back in 1994 in August, it was supposed to come out for ratification on August 10th. August 4th, the date was released. And I sent out a fax alert at that time. We didn't have email at that time. A fax alert to 4,400 people. And the next day, so many people were calling into the U.S. Senate that it literally collapsed the Senate computerized phone system, and it stayed collapsed for 3 days. That wasn't me. That was God. There's no other way you can describe, because they said to have that happen, we had to really get about 2 to 3 million people to call in almost simultaneously.
Wow.
And it just overwhelmed the computer system. So that's one of the things that really encouraged me, is that it was not time, and that we stopped it. And then later on, a month later, when the thing was brought up again, it was canceled at that point. We got the Global Biodiversity Assessment through another miraculous way. I won't spend the time discussing it, but we stopped it an hour before the closure vote of the treaty.
Isn't that amazing, ladies and gentlemen? And as we say all the time and encourage our listeners, yes, one individual, a few individuals can make a radical difference for good. And I've been watching some of the pre-recorded or after-the-fact recorded from TED, held down in Monterey, and they have Al Gore and all the progressives there promoting their thing. And it's very interesting. Their academics, technology is playing into that as well. This whole idea of population control to eliminate people, they are actually promoting it as an alternative, and people are applauding it. It's amazing. And not only that, but then again, the property rights situation. And when we're talking about property, we're talking about literal property, but we're also talking about our intellectual property, which is now coming under attack. So
increasing fire, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I expect that somehow I'll be attacked on that level sometime if this book ever becomes successful and becomes a bestseller. They'll try to get it off the market. I don't know how they would do it, but nonetheless, anyone who tries to oppose them, they basically, this is the interesting thing about it. The thing that really triggered me on this book was reading a book written in 1895 by a psychiatrist named Gustave Le Bon. And that psychiatrist was explaining, when I started to read it, I just couldn't put it down because he was talking about the modern-day progressive. He was actually seeing it there. They weren't called progressives then, but he was seeing that, and he described them to a T. And he basically said they can't connect with reality. They basically are very, very destructive, even against themselves, because they will, as they move like a school of fish, suddenly they will just turn 180 degrees and go some other direction. He says they're like automatons. He used that word, automatons, and that's what we're seeing today. Something happens, but the next day, it's the common phrase that's used by all these progressives across the country, the newspapers, the news media, and so forth. Just almost automatically, they hear it from somebody, and they just carry it on, just like a school of fish.
Exactly. I want to just throw a few quotes out here on the population control and then really want to focus on the property. Lamont Cole, in her book Toxic Terror, actually in Elizabeth Williams' book Toxic Terror, Lamont Cole is quoted as saying, "To feed a starving child is to exacerbate the world population problem." Yes. And then it was Charles Worth's Environmental Defense Fund said, "People are the cause of all problems. We have too many of them. We need to get rid of some of them." And he was talking about the ban on DDT is as good a way as any. So that's the kind of mentality and the kind of things you hear at these conferences that these intellectuals think is right on. And then you've got Peter Burrell, and I don't know if he's still the president of the National Audubon Society, but he said...
I don't think so.
His quote is, "We reject the idea of private property." I mean, it couldn't be more clear than that.
No, it can't. In fact, the 1972 Habitat 1 conference that was held in Stockholm, or Vancouver it was, British Columbia, basically laid out in this premise in the consensus document the fact that we can no longer have private property as we have seen it in the past. It must be allowed to be controlled by the state, that the state has the right to determine how a piece of person's private property is going to be used because it has to be done for the benefit of all.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on again. I just think you're one of the modern-day heroes because you continue to stay in the battle and you are courageous in talking about the truth no matter what comes against you. I appreciate you that you're living in our day. You're living at such a time as this.
Well, thank you very much. It is a risk and so forth, but I fully know what that risk is, and I really feel called to do it.
Is there a website this book is available at?
Yes, it's on AmericaPlundered.com. AmericaPlundered.com.
Well, thank you so much, and we'll have you back on.
Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. As always, I encourage you to stay informed and pray informed. So that's it. I encourage you to tune in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday on KDIA AM 1640 at 4:30 p.m. and every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sundays for our 1-hour live stream show, which you can access by going to changingworldviews.com, listen online, or by telephone at 424-222-5360, or online, changingworldviews.com. Click on the Blog Talk Radio link, and that'll take you to our online stream show. And there's also archives there as well. And so until I see you next time, this is Sharon Hughes saying it like it is.
Thanks for listening to Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes. You can get more information on today's topic or order a CD of today's show by visiting changingworldviews.com or writing us at Changing Worldviews, P.O. Box 750624, Petaluma, California, 94975-0624. You can also contact us at talk@changingworldviews.com. That's talk@changingworldviews.com. Our program is listener-supported, and we appreciate your tax-deductible donations to help us get the truth out on the important issues Sharon addresses on the show. So until next time, remember, stay alert, stay informed. We live in a changing world.